My name is Cheryl, and I just turned 57 last month. For 22 years, I've been raising my daughter Sophia alone, after losing my husband James when she was only 7. We've always been inseparable, sharing everything with each other. At least that's what I thought until Sophia called me 3 weeks ago, announcing she was engaged but didn't want me to meet her fiancé, Anthony. Then came the words that broke my heart. "Mum, I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding." I couldn't understand what was happening. Before I tell you what I discovered when I followed my daughter, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love. James and I met in college, fell madly in love, and got married right after graduation. We had Sophia when I was 28, and those first 7 years as a family were the happiest of my life. James was a wonderful father who adored our little girl. He would spend hours reading to her, building blanket forts in the living room and teaching her to ride a bike in our driveway. Then came that rainy Tuesday night in April. James was driving back from a work meeting to pick me up from my late hospital shift when a drunk driver swerved into his lane. The police said he died instantly. Just like that, our perfect little world shattered, and I became a widow at 35 with a 7-year-old daughter to raise alone. Those first few years were a blur of grief and exhaustion. I would catch Sophia sitting in James's favourite armchair, clutching his old sweater that still smelled faintly of his cologne. At night, after putting her to bed, I would collapse on the couch, overwhelmed by the responsibility of being both mother and father to this heartbroken little girl. Money was tight. My nursing salary barely covered our mortgage and bills, so I started picking up extra shifts, sometimes working 16 hours straight. My mother would watch Sophia when she could, but often my daughter would have to come to the hospital after school and do her homework in the break room until my shift ended. Despite everything, Sophia and I developed rituals that kept us connected. Sunday mornings were sacred for our pancake breakfasts, where we would experiment with different toppings and shapes. We started a mother-daughter book club, just the two of us reading the same book and discussing it over hot chocolate. And every year on her birthday, we would take a weekend trip somewhere special, even if it was just to a neighbouring town with an interesting museum or park. As Sophia grew into a teenager, our relationship remained strong when many of her friends were fighting constantly with their parents. She would tell me about her crushes, her disappointments, her dreams. When she started dating in high school, she always brought her boyfriends home to meet me. Nothing seemed off limits in our conversations. Sophia was always bright and kind-hearted, though she could be stubborn when she believed in something. She graduated with honours and decided to become an elementary school teacher. I was so proud watching her cross that stage at her college graduation, knowing all the sacrifices had been worth it. For the past 7 years, she's been teaching 3rd grade at Franklin Elementary. Her students adore her, and she comes home with the funniest stories about the things they say and do. She puts her whole heart into teaching, staying late to help struggling students, and spending her own money on classroom supplies. Then, about 8 months ago, something changed. Sophia started cancelling our weekly dinners. When we did get together, she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. She would be vague about her plans and change the subject whenever I asked about her dating life. I tried to give her space. After all, she's 29 now, not a child anymore. But I couldn't help worrying that something was wrong. Was she ill, in some kind of trouble? The more evasive she became, the more my concern grew. Then came the phone call that took my breath away. Sophia, sounding happier than she had in months, told me she was engaged to a man named Anthony. But before I could ask to meet him, she quickly added that he was very private and they wanted to keep things low-key. "But surely he wants to meet your mother before the wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice light. There was a long pause before she replied, "Actually, Mum, we've been talking and we think it might be better for everyone if you don't attend the wedding." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What could possibly make my only daughter not want me at her wedding? What was she hiding from me? And who was this man who had convinced her to cut me out of the most important day of her life? After that devastating phone call, I spent the night crying, replaying every interaction with Sophia from the past year, searching for clues about what had gone so terribly wrong between us. Had I said something hurtful without realizing it? Was there some maternal failure I was blind to? The next morning, I called Sophia again, hoping for a better explanation. She answered with obvious reluctance in her voice. "Honey, I think we need to talk about this in person," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mum, I know you're upset, but this is our decision," she replied. "But I don't understand. We've always been so close. How can you not want me at your wedding?" "It's complicated," she said. "Anthony and I want a very small ceremony. Just a few people. I'm not just people, Sophia. I'm your mother," she sighed. "Can we please not do this right now? I have to get to school." And just like that, she ended the call, leaving me with even more questions than before. Over the next few days, I tried different approaches. I sent her a text saying I respected her choices, but would love to at least meet Anthony for coffee. No response. I left a voicemail offering to host a small dinner for them at my house. She texted back with just, "Now isn't a good time." Finally, I called my best friend Linda, who has known Sophia since she was a baby. I needed an outside perspective. "It just doesn't make sense," I told Linda, my voice breaking. "She's shutting me out completely, and I don't know why." "Have you considered that there might be something wrong with this Anthony character?" Linda asked. "Maybe he's much older or married or has some kind of criminal past he's hiding." The thought had crossed my mind, of course. But Sophia had always been so sensible about her relationships. She wouldn't get engaged to someone like that, I said, though a seed of doubt had been planted. "People in love don't always see clearly," Linda reminded me. "Maybe she's embarrassed or afraid of your reaction." That conversation left me even more worried. I decided to reach out to Megan, Sophia's closest friend since college. If anyone knew what was really going on, it would be her. When we met for coffee, Megan seemed uncomfortable avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with her napkin. "Megan, please," I begged. "I'm really worried about Sophia. Do you know anything about this fiancé she doesn't want me to meet?" "I've only met Anthony once," she said carefully. "He seemed nice enough. But why doesn't Sophia want me to meet him? Is he controlling her in some way?" Megan's eyes widened. "No, it's nothing like that. Look, Mrs. Taylor, I think you should talk to Sophia. It's not my place to get involved." I left that coffee shop feeling like I was trapped in a mystery where everyone knew the answer except me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept conjuring worst-case scenarios. What if Anthony was abusive and was isolating Sophia from her support system? What if he had some connection to our family that Sophia was afraid to reveal? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something was very wrong. The next day, I drove to Sophia's apartment, hoping to catch her at home. She wasn't there, but I still had the spare key she'd given me years ago for emergencies. I debated with myself in the car for 20 minutes before finally deciding to use it. Inside her apartment, everything looked normal at first. Then I noticed a stack of wedding magazines on the coffee table, along with a notebook filled with venue options, catering menus, and a guest list. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, feeling like an intruder in my daughter's life. The guest list included names I didn't recognize, presumably Anthony's family and friends, along with several of Sophia's friends. My name was nowhere to be found. I put everything back exactly as I had found it and left feeling like a stranger to my own daughter. In the days that followed, I tried one more time to have an honest conversation with Sophia. I invited her to lunch at her favorite restaurant, determined to keep things calm and open. She showed up looking tired with dark circles under her eyes. Had wedding planning been stressful, or was there something else causing her sleepless nights? "Sophia," I said gently, after we ordered, "I need to understand what's happening. Whatever it is, we can work through it together. We always have." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old openness in her eyes. Then she shook her head. Mom, please trust me on this. It's complicated, but it's better this way. Better for whom? I asked, my frustration finally showing. Not for me, and I can't imagine it's better for you to get married without your mother there. She looked down at her plate. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices. Is he making you choose between him and me? I asked directly. No, she said, looking genuinely shocked. Anthony would never do that. This isn't about him forcing anything. Then what is it about please, honey, help me understand? She took a deep breath, and for a second, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. Instead, she stood up. I have to go. I'm sorry, Mum. And once again, I was left alone with my questions and fears. After weeks of sleepless nights and countless tears, I reached a breaking point. The mother in me couldn't stand by while my daughter potentially made the biggest mistake of her life. If Sophia wouldn't tell me what was going on, I would have to find out for myself. I called my sister Janet, who has always been my voice of reason, and explained the situation. I'm thinking of following her, I admitted. I know it sounds crazy and invasive, but I'm terrified she's in some kind of trouble. Janet was quiet for a moment. Normally, I'd say that's crossing a line, she finally said. But given how out of character this all is for Sophia, I think you need to trust your instincts. Something isn't right here. That validation was all I needed. I noticed other concerning changes in Sophia recently too. She'd lost weight, her usual sparkle was gone, and she seemed constantly on edge, checking her phone like she was waiting for bad news. These were all warning signs I couldn't ignore. One evening I spent hours researching the warning signs of abusive relationships. So many of them seemed to fit sudden secretiveness, withdrawal from family personality changes, unexplained anxiety. Each bullet point I read increased my determination to discover the truth. The moral implications of what I was planning weighed heavily on me. I'd always respected Sophia's independence and privacy. Following her felt like a betrayal of trust, yet letting her potentially walk into danger seemed like the greater failure as a mother. I decided to take a day off work the following Tuesday, when I knew Sophia would have a half day at school due to parent-teacher conferences. I parked my car a block away from her apartment building at 11 a.m. and waited, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and terrified. At 12:30, Sophia emerged wearing a pretty blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked nervous but excited, constantly checking her reflection in her phone screen and smoothing her hair. This wasn't her usual post-work demeanor. I waited until she got into her car and pulled away from the curb before starting my own engine. Following someone in real life is nothing like the movies. I nearly lost her twice at traffic lights and had to run a yellow light to keep her in sight. She drove to a part of town I rarely visited, eventually parking outside an upscale restaurant called Vincenzo's. I found a spot across the street and watched as she checked her makeup one more time before heading inside. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. I was finally going to see the mysterious Anthony who had come between my daughter and me. I gave her 5 minutes, then crossed the street. Through the restaurant window, I could see Sophia sitting at a table facing the door. She was alone, glancing anxiously at her watch. Finding a spot at the bar where I could observe without being seen, I ordered a glass of water and waited. The bartender gave me a sympathetic look, probably assuming I was a woman stood up on a date. 20 minutes later, Sophia's face lit up. She stood quickly, smoothing her dress, a smile transforming her features. I turned carefully to follow her gaze. A tall man in a well-tailored suit was walking toward her table. From behind, he had broad shoulders and dark hair with hints of grey at the temples. There was something about his walk, something hauntingly familiar that made my stomach clench. Sophia embraced him warmly, and they sat down together. She was talking animatedly, gesturing with her hands, the way she always does when excited. He reached across the table to take her hand, and she didn't pull away. Whatever this relationship was, it didn't appear abusive from what I could see. Sophia looked genuinely happy, more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. I was considering leaving, feeling somewhat reassured, but still confused, when the man turned slightly to signal the waiter, and that's when I saw his face clearly for the first time. The water glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there was no mistaking that face, older now, but still the same. Anthony wasn't Anthony at all. He was Robert Wilson, my late husband's younger brother, the man who had stood up at James's funeral and publicly accused me of being responsible for his death. The room began to spin as fragments of the past crashed over me like violent waves. Robert Wilson. The last time I'd seen him was at James's funeral 22 years ago. I remembered it vividly, standing by the casket, with 7-year-old Sophia clutching my hand, both of us drowning in grief, when Robert approached, his face contorted with rage. "You killed him!" He had spat at me, his voice carrying across the silent funeral home. "If he hadn't been rushing to pick you up from your shift, he'd still be alive. You and your selfish demands killed my brother," people had gasped. My mother-in-law had started sobbing harder, and little Sophia had hidden her face in my black dress, trembling. Robert was only 24, then devastated by his older brother's death. But his accusation had cut through me like a knife because a part of me believed it too. If I hadn't asked James to pick me up that night, because my car was in the shop, maybe he wouldn't have been on that road when the drunk driver came speeding around the curve. The aftermath of that funeral scene was swift and terrible. James's family, led by Robert, effectively cut us off. My in-laws, consumed by their own grief and influenced by their younger son's rage, stopped calling. Birthday cards for Sophia ceased. Invitations to family gatherings never came. It was as if we had died, along with James. And now, here was Robert sitting across from my daughter, holding her hand, apparently engaged to marry her. I must have made a sound because several people at the bar turned to look at me. The bartender was already cleaning up my broken glass, asking if I was okay. "Fine," I mumbled, throwing some money on the counter and sliding off the bar stool. "I need the restroom." I locked myself in a bathroom stall, struggling to breathe. How had this happened? Did Sophia know who Anthony really was? She had been so young when we lost contact with James's family, just a child with fading memories. Had Robert recognized her name and deliberately pursued her? Was this some twisted form of revenge? My hands shook as I splashed cold water on my face. I needed to think clearly. I had to get Sophia away from him before she made a terrible mistake. As I emerged from the restroom, I nearly collided with a server carrying a tray of drinks. Steadying myself against the wall, I heard Sophia's voice from nearby. I can't tell her, she wouldn't understand. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, out of sight, but within earshot of their table. "Sooner or later, you'll have to," Robert's voice replied, deeper than I remembered. "We can't build a marriage on a foundation of secrets." "I know," Sophia sighed. "But you didn't see her face when I mentioned not coming to the wedding. She was devastated. If she knew the truth." "The truth is complicated," Robert said. "We all made mistakes back then. Me, most of all." I couldn't bear to hear more. I slipped past their table, keeping my head down, and hurried out of the restaurant. In the safety of my car, I finally allowed myself to break down, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The pieces were falling into place now. Sophia must have discovered who Robert was after they started dating. Rather than tell me, she had chosen to keep it secret, perhaps fearing my reaction or wanting to avoid reopening old wounds. But why continue the relationship? Why agree to marry him? Did she not know how cruelly he had treated us after James died? Or had he fed her some altered version of history that painted me as the villain? Through my tears, I watched them exit the restaurant. They were walking close together, his arm around her shoulders. They looked like any happy couple enjoying an afternoon together. They got into his car, a sleek black BMW, and drove away. I followed at a distance, my mind racing with questions and fears. Where were they going? What was I going to do when they stopped? 20 minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Park, a peaceful spot along the river where James and I used to take Sophia for picnics. My heart twisted at the thought that Robert might now be creating new memories there with my daughter. I parked and watched as they walked along the riverside path, eventually settling on a bench overlooking the water. This was my chance. Before I could second-guess myself, I got out of the car and walked directly toward them. Sophia saw me first. Her eyes widened in shock, then filled with something like guilt. "Mom," she gasped, standing quickly. "What are you doing here?" Robert turned, and for the first time in over 2 decades we were face to face. He looked older lines around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably James's brother. They had the same jaw, the same eyebrows that furrowed when surprised. "Hello, Cheryl," he said softly, also rising to his feet. "It's been a long time." His calmness infuriated me. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Using a fake name, worming your way into my daughter's life." Sophia stepped between us. "Mum, please let me explain." "Explain what?" I cried. "How you're engaged to a man who publicly blamed me for your father's death, who helped his family cut us off when we were grieving and vulnerable." Robert winced at my words, but didn't deny them. "I deserve that," he said, "and much more." "You don't deserve my daughter," I shot back. "Mum," Sophia's voice was sharp, "you need to listen. This isn't what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I challenged her. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months about dating the man who destroyed what was left of our family after your father died." Sophia's face crumpled. "I didn't know how to tell you. I knew it would hurt you." "So you thought excluding me from your wedding would hurt less?" The betrayal in my voice was unmistakable. "Please," Robert interjected. "This is my fault, not Sophia's." He gestured to the bench. "Will you sit? Let us explain." Every instinct told me to grab Sophia's hand and drag her away from this man, but she was an adult, not a child I could protect by simply removing her from danger. If I wanted to understand what was happening, I would have to listen. I sat at the far end of the bench, my body rigid with tension. Robert took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize for that day at the funeral. I was young and drowning in grief, but that's no excuse for what I said to you. I've carried the shame of those words for 22 years. Words have consequences," I said coldly. "Your words cost Sophia relationships with her grandparents, her cousins, half of her family." He nodded, his expression pained. "I know. I poisoned their perception with my anger. By the time I realized how wrong I'd been, the damage was done, and I didn't know how to fix it. And now," I gestured between him and Sophia, "is this your way of fixing it? Seducing my daughter?" "Mum," Sophia protested. "It wasn't like that at all." "Then tell me what it was like," I said. "I'm listening." Sophia sat between us, twisting her engagement ring nervously. "We met at an education conference in Chicago last year. I had no idea who he was. He's a principal now at Westlake High School, and we were both attending a workshop on innovative teaching methods. We started talking about education," Robert continued, "and hit it off immediately. I noticed her name tag said Sophia Taylor, but Taylor is such a common name I didn't make the connection. We exchanged emails professionally at first," Sophia added. "Then it became more personal. When I mentioned I was from River City, he asked if I'd grown up there. As soon as she mentioned her mother was a nurse named Cheryl, who had raised her after her father died, I knew exactly who she was," Robert said quietly. I should have told her the truth right then. "But he didn't," Sophia said, a hint of accusation in her voice as she glanced at him. "He suggested meeting in person when he came to town for a conference a few weeks later. I told myself I would explain everything face to face," Robert admitted. "But when we met, seeing James's eyes looking back at me from his daughter, I couldn't bring myself to reopen those old wounds. Not right away." "So you lied," I said flatly, "to both of us." "Yes," he acknowledged. "I told Sophia my name was Anthony Roberts." A cowardly attempt to postpone the inevitable. By the time he finally told me the truth, 3 months later, we were already falling in love, Sophia said softly. He showed me old family photos, told me stories about Dad that I'd never heard. My throat tightened. What stories? College pranks they pulled together, the summer they worked as lifeguards at the lake, how nervous Dad was the day he proposed to you. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Mum, he has recordings of Dad's voice from before the accident, old voicemails and videos. I got to hear him laugh. The thought of those precious fragments of James that I'd never known existed hit me like a physical blow. All these years, while we'd clung to fading memories and a handful of photographs, Robert had been holding these treasures that should have been shared. I went through a lot of therapy after James died, Robert said. It took years for me to work through my misplaced anger. By the time I was ready to reach out and try to make amends, so much time had passed. I didn't know how to find you, or if you'd even want to hear from me. And then I literally walked into his life, Sophia finished. When I realized who she was, Robert continued, I saw it as a second chance, a way to finally right some of the wrongs I'd done, but I handled it badly, again. So you continued lying, I said. For how long? Sophia looked down. We've been together for 8 months. He told me the truth about 5 months ago. And you chose him, I said, the hurt evident in my voice. You chose the man who ripped away half your family over your own mother. No, Sophia cried, reaching for my hand. That's not what happened at all. I didn't want to lose either of you. That's why we came up with the idea of a small ceremony without family. We thought it might be easier than forcing you two to face each other. But that was wrong, Robert added quickly. I see that now. Secrets only cause more pain in the long run. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Behind the guilt and anxiety on her face, I could see genuine happiness when she glanced at Robert. Whatever their relationship was built on, it wasn't a lie or a scheme for revenge, and Robert himself seemed nothing like the angry young man who had lashed out at me all those years ago. His apology sounded sincere, his regret palpable, but 22 years of hurt and lost connections couldn't be erased in a single conversation in the park. I need time to process all this, I said, finally standing up. Sophia, we'll talk later. Mom, please, she began, but I held up my hand. I'm not saying no to anything right now. I'm just saying I need time. Robert stood as well. Of course, take all the time you need. And Cheryl, I truly am sorry for everything. I nodded stiffly and walked away, my mind reeling with revelations that had upended everything I thought I knew about my daughter's engagement. For 3 days after the park confrontation, I shut myself away in my house, ignoring calls from both Sophia and Linda. I needed space to sort through the hurricane of emotions, betrayal, anger, confusion, and somewhere underneath it all, a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. I called in sick to work something I rarely do, and spent hours looking through old photo albums of James and Sophia. There were so few pictures of James with his brother. Had I unconsciously removed them after the funeral, trying to erase the painful memories? On the second day, I called Dr. Martin, my therapist, from the years after James died. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, but she managed to fit me in for an emergency session. Forgiveness isn't about condoning what was done to you, she reminded me gently after I poured out the whole story. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying that pain. But how can I forgive someone who took away Sophia's extended family, who made me question whether I was responsible for my husband's death? My voice broke on the last words. Dr. Martin leaned forward. Cheryl, were you responsible for James's death? No, I whispered. The drunk driver was. Have you ever fully forgiven yourself? The question hit me like a thunderbolt. Had I, or had I been carrying a kernel of that self-blame all these years, nurturing it in secret while presenting a strong face to the world? And my daughter. That night, I found myself talking to James as I often did in the early years after his death. What would you want me to do? I asked the empty room. He's your brother, she's your daughter. They're both important parts of you. I could almost hear James's gentle laugh, could imagine him saying, "When did you start asking permission to do what you think is right, Cher?" He always called me that, shortening my name in a way no one else ever did. On the third day, I got a text from Robert, not Sophia. It simply said, "I'd like to talk to you alone. Your terms, your place or public, whenever you're ready." After an hour of deliberation, I responded, "The coffee shop on Maple Street, tomorrow at 2. His reply was immediate. "I'll be there. Thank you." I spent the morning preparing myself, trying to decide what I needed to know, what I could forgive, and what boundaries I needed to set. This wasn't just about Robert anymore. It was about Sophia's future, and by extension, my own. Robert was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffee cups in front of him. He stood when he saw me, his expression cautious but determined. "I remembered you take yours with just cream," he said, gesturing to one of the cups. "At least you used to." "I still do," I replied, surprised he would remember such a detail after all this time. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke. "Thank you for meeting me. I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." I took a sip of coffee, buying time. "I'm here for Sophia," he nodded. "As you should be. She loves you tremendously, you know. These past months of keeping secrets have been tearing her apart." "Then why ask her to do it?" Robert sighed. "I didn't, not exactly. When I finally told her who I really was, she was furious. Didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Then she called and said she wanted to hear about James, about her father. You could have contacted me then." "I suggested it," he said. "But Sophia was afraid of hurting you. She remembered more from the funeral than I realized. She remembered you crying yourself to sleep for months afterward. She didn't want to bring all that pain back." I stared into my coffee cup. She was 7. I thought I had hidden it better. "Children see more than we give them credit for," Robert said softly. "She was trying to protect you in her way. By excluding me from her wedding, that was a terrible idea," he admitted. "I see that clearly now. We got caught in a spiral of secrecy that just kept getting more complicated." I finally looked directly at him. "Why are you marrying my daughter, Robert? Is this some kind of atonement? Or worse, some twisted way of replacing your brother in our lives?" His face registered shock, then sadness. "No. God, no. I fell in love with Sophia before I knew who she was. She's brilliant, compassionate, and sees the world in ways that constantly surprise me. I'm marrying her because I can't imagine my life without her anymore." There was such sincerity in his voice that I found myself wanting to believe him. "I have 2 children from my first marriage," he continued. "Teenagers now. Sophia's wonderful with them. They adore her already." This was news to me. Sophia's going to be a stepmother. Yes, to Emma, who's 16, and Jack, who's 14. They live primarily with their mother in Lakeside, but stay with me every other weekend and Wednesdays. I tried to absorb this new information. My daughter becoming an instant mother to 2 teenagers. How had she kept so much of her life hidden from me? "I want to show you something," Robert said, pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then slid it across the table. It was a photo album. The first image showed a much younger James and Robert arms, slung around each other's shoulders, grinning widely on what looked like a fishing boat. "My parents kept everything," Robert explained as I swiped through the images. "Every photo, every school project, every letter James ever wrote home from college." My finger froze over a photo I'd never seen before. James holding newborn Sophia, looking down at her with such overwhelming love. It made my chest ache. "They kept all of this," I whispered, "for 22 years and never shared it with her." "My parents made terrible mistakes," Robert said quietly. "We all did. They let grief and anger rob them of knowing their only grandchild. I let my misplaced blame cost me years with my niece." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "These are letters from my mother to Sophia. She wrote one every year on Sophia's birthday, but never sent them. She was too proud, too hurt, too stuck in her grief. She died still writing them, never having mailed a single one. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Does Sophia know about these? Not yet. I wanted to ask your permission first. The fact that he was asking, that he recognized my place as Sophia's mother, moved me more than I wanted to admit. There's something else, he continued. I've been in contact with my cousins, James's cousins, the whole extended family, really. They all want to reconnect with Sophia, with both of you. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. This was so much more than I had expected from this meeting. Why now? I asked. After all this time, because we've been given a second chance through a coincidence so unlikely, it feels like James had a hand in it somehow. Robert's voice caught. My brother would be so proud of the woman Sophia has become, and he would be so proud of how you raised her. For the first time since seeing Robert at the restaurant, I felt tears gather in my eyes. Not angry tears or hurt tears, but something else, relief perhaps, or the beginning of healing. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately, he said gently, just to consider the possibility that something good can come from all this pain, that maybe James's family doesn't have to be lost to Sophia forever. I looked down at the envelope of letters, thinking of all the birthdays Sophia had celebrated without her grandparents, all the family stories she'd never heard, all the connections she'd been denied. I'll think about it, I promised. That's all I can offer right now, Robert nodded. That's more than I deserve. As I left the coffee shop, clutching the envelope of never-sent birthday letters, I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but it no longer seemed like an impenetrable wall. Instead, there were cracks beginning to form, letting in slivers of possibility. The days following my meeting with Robert were filled with difficult conversations and emotional revelations. First came the heart-to-heart with Sophia at my kitchen table, where we both cried and apologized for the secrets and misunderstandings that had come between us. I should have told you as soon as I found out who he was, Sophia admitted, wiping her tears. I was just so afraid of losing what I'd found with him and equally terrified of hurting you. And I should have given you more credit, I told her. You're not a child anymore. You have the right to make your own choices, even difficult ones. I showed her the envelope of birthday letters from her grandmother, watching as she carefully opened each one and read the words of a woman she had never really known. Some made her smile, others brought fresh tears. She watched me grow up from a distance, Sophia murmured, looking at a letter from her 16th birthday that mentioned how proud her grandmother was, that Sophia had made honor roll information she must have gleaned from local newspaper announcements. All these years thinking they had forgotten me, I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. We were all caught in a web of hurt and pride, but maybe it's not too late to change that. The road to reconciliation wasn't smooth or quick. I agreed to a dinner with Robert, Sophia, and Robert's children, Emma and Jack. The teenagers were understandably wary of me at first, this unknown great aunt suddenly appearing in their lives. But as the evening progressed, and we shared stories about their father and uncle as young men, the atmosphere gradually warmed. Emma, I discovered, had James's artistic talent, something that had skipped both Robert and Sophia. She showed me sketches that could have been drawn by my late husband's hand. Jack had his uncle's laugh, a surprising bark that erupted when he found something truly funny. Watching Sophia with these children, I could see she had already begun forming bonds with them. She knew Emma's favourite bands and Jack's struggles with algebra. She was creating her own family connections, building bridges I had thought were permanently burned. 2 weeks after our park confrontation, Robert brought over boxes of James's belongings that his parents had kept. Together, the three of us went through them, sharing memories and discovering new facets of the man we had all loved in different ways. And then Robert played the recordings. Simple things, James leaving voicemails about being late for dinner, a video from a family barbecue where he was explaining how to properly grill a steak, a birthday message he'd recorded for Robert. Hearing his voice after 22 years nearly broke me, that beloved voice speaking ordinary everyday words, as if he had just stepped out of the room for a moment, rather than being gone for decades. Sophia held my hand tightly as we listened, both of us crying silently. I should have shared these years ago, Robert said, his own eyes damp. Keeping them to myself was selfish. You were hurting too, I found myself saying, surprising even myself with the empathy in my voice. As weeks turned into months, the wedding plans continued, but with significant changes. No longer a small, family-free affair, it was evolving into a true celebration with both sides of Sophia's family present. I met Robert's father, now a frail widower in his 80s, who broke down weeping when he saw me apologising over and over for the years of silence. We cried together for James, for all the lost time, and for the miracle of this unexpected reunion. Extended family members reached out one by one, cousins and aunts and uncles, who had been absent from our lives for so long. Some relationships were easier to rebuild than others. Old hurts didn't disappear overnight, and there were awkward moments and difficult conversations. But there were beautiful moments too, like when James's cousin Michael, a professional photographer, presented Sophia with an album of restored family photos featuring James throughout his childhood and young adulthood. Or when Robert's aunt Eleanor taught Sophia how to make James's favourite lemon cake from a family recipe I'd never known about. 6 months after our confrontation in the park, I stood in the back of the church preparing to walk my daughter down the aisle. Sophia looked radiant in her wedding gown, her eyes bright with happiness. "Are you ready, Mum?" she asked, taking my arm. I adjusted her veil slightly, my heart full of contradictory emotions, joy for her happiness lingering, sadness for James's absence, and a newfound sense of peace about the future. "I'm ready," I told her, and I meant it in more ways than one. As we processed down the aisle, I saw Robert waiting at the altar, his expression a mixture of love for Sophia and gratitude toward me. Beside him stood his teenage children, both smiling nervously in their formal attire. In the front pews sat an unusual family gathering, Robert's father in his wheelchair on one side, my mother on the other, surrounded by extended family members from both sides who had been strangers to each other until recently. When it came time in the ceremony for the minister to ask who was giving this woman in marriage, I spoke the traditional words clearly, "I do." But what I was really saying went much deeper. I was giving my permission not just for this marriage, but for the healing of old wounds, for the reconnection of family ties that should never have been broken, and for a future where the past informed but did not dictate our choices. At the reception, Robert surprised me by acknowledging me in his toast. "To Cheryl," he said, raising his glass and turning to face me, "who raised an incredible daughter on her own, who found the strength to open her heart to forgiveness, and without whom this day would not be possible. James would be so proud of both of you." The room erupted in applause as I blinked back tears, accepting for perhaps the first time that I had done well by my daughter, that the years of sacrifice and loneliness had resulted in this amazing young woman who was now creating her own path forward. Later, James's father, Henry, asked me to sit with him for a while, his aged hand clasping mine. "I've followed your career all these years," he confessed. "Every promotion at the hospital, every community award. James chose well when he chose you. You knew all that and still didn't reach out." I asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. "Pride," he said simply. "Terrible, foolish pride. The years go by so quickly, and suddenly you realize you've wasted precious time that can never be recovered." I squeezed his hand. "We're here now. That's what matters." 1 year after the wedding, we gathered for a special anniversary dinner. Sophia and Robert, Emma and Jack Henry, in his wheelchair, my mother and me. A blended family created from the ashes of tragedy and misunderstanding. During the meal, Robert presented me with a gift, a leather-bound book filled with memories of James compiled from everyone who had known and loved him. Stories I'd never heard, photos I'd never seen, perspectives on my husband I'd never considered. We all held pieces of him, Robert explained. Now we can share them. As I leafed through the pages, I realized that something profound had happened over this past year. The sharp edges of grief and anger had softened, not disappearing, but transforming into something I could carry more easily. I looked around the table at these people who had become my family in ways I could never have imagined, at my daughter happier than I'd ever seen her, at Robert, no longer the enemy, but a man trying to make amends for past mistakes, at Emma and Jack, my unexpected bonus family. James was still gone, a hole in our lives that would never be completely filled. But his legacy lived on in all of us, in the connections we had rebuilt and the new ones we had formed. Later that night, in the quiet of my home, I talked to James as I still sometimes did. But this time, instead of asking what I should do or lamenting his absence, I simply said, "We're okay now, all of us. Your family is whole again." And for the first time in 23 years, I felt completely at peace with that truth. Family secrets can devastate relationships for decades, but sometimes with courage and forgiveness, even the deepest wounds can heal. Have you ever experienced a family reconciliation that seemed impossible? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more real-life journeys, and share with someone who might need to know that healing is possible even after years of estrangement. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, it's never too late to mend what's broken, especially when it comes to family.